Namaskar, Om Shanti.
Om Shanti.
And a very warm and hearty welcome to Rourkela, the beautiful green steel city of Rourkela, and to Rourkela steel plant, and to this lounge, which is you are at Human Resource Development Center of Rourkela steel plant.
Thank you.
So it's a pleasure to have you. When I got this information that I needed to sort of have a conversation with you, so I thought this is a good opportunity for me to start from, and generally whenever I do such sessions, I'm always intrigued by the stories of life of people, right? Because I believe we all have a story to tell. And it's only that some people get this opportunity, like Shah Rukh Khan, who is often asked, tell me your story. But normally we don't get this opportunity. So I always feel this is a wonderful opportunity to start. So that brings me to my first question, is that about your childhood. That's the place where we all start our life, right? So how was your childhood, and where was it? How did you spend your childhood? Something, a little bit.
Childhood days were in Pune, which is where I was born. And I was staying at that time with my mother, my grandmother and grandfather and great-grandmother. We were all in the same apartment together. My father was in Africa working at that time. And when my mother came into contact with the Brahmakumaris, I was 7. And so I celebrated my 8th birthday at the Brahmakumaris with a woman who later on became my mentor, Daddy Jayanti.
Okay.
So I first met her when I was quite young. And when my father came back from Africa, at that time my mother had already started meditation and so on. And my father felt that it was time for him to move from Africa, and he had an invitation to start a business with a partner in London. And so age 8, December 1957, we moved from my mother, my father, my younger brother and myself, we moved to London. And my mother continued with her spiritual practices. And from age 8 to 12, my younger brother and myself would sit with her just for a few minutes every night, and she would read us a little bit of the teachings. And it was pleasant, it was very calming. But by the time I was 12, my brother and I decided we didn't want to do that anymore. We wanted to watch the news at 9 o'clock at night, and my mother was wise enough to say that's fine. And so between 12 and 18, 14 I came back to India, and again came to contact with the Brahmakumaris. But it was age 18 when I came to settle in India for a longer stretch of time, just out of curiosity to get back to my roots, that then I studied the teachings of the Brahmakumaris.
So a lot of learning sessions right from your 8 years to maybe 18, as you said.
Yeah.
So you were trying to just find out a little more in depth about what is this Brahmakumaris all about and all. So that's interesting. So at the same time, you were also concurrently you're having your schooling and all?
That's right.
So you did your schooling in Pune and then in London?
Yes, so junior school and then secondary school was all in London. And I started university, but while I was at university, there was a trigger. And that led me to come to stay in India for an extended time. Because in between coming to India every year was just like a tourist on holiday and meeting my relatives, big extended family. But sitting in the, I was studying pharmacy, so it was a theatre style place. And I was sitting at the back, and at the bottom there was a professor writing formulae on the board, chemical formulae. And I suddenly felt I was out of the body, up there, looking down and seeing myself scribble notes. And I asked myself the question when I was up there, why am I doing this? And I brought myself back with a jerk. Don't be silly, get on with it. And so I carried on doing my notes. But I shared this experience at home, and my father, we had a very good relationship, closer to my father actually.
Generally daughters are, yeah.
My mother was following the path of meditation, but it was my father who was very curious about what I was going through. And so when I shared this experience with him, he said, you know, you have no connection with your roots. You left your roots in India and you haven't had a chance to explore them. Why don't you take time out and go to India? I said, what about uni? And he said, you had just one term, which was really just getting to know people. It wasn't really intense study of any type. You can come back and pick it up any time. But take this time, now that this question has come in your mind, to spend time in India. And after 3 months of being a social butterfly in India, just moving around and meeting people, which was gorgeous, I decided I needed something to educate my mind. And the first person I thought of was Dadi Jayanti, because she'd been connected with me through my teenage years. And so when I went to see her, she was surprised because I'd been in India 3 months already and I hadn't bothered to go. Then when I did go, she said, would you like me to share something, or do you have something to say? I said, Dadi, I've come to listen. And she spoke to me about conscience and how the conscience has been influenced by education, peer pressure, media, society. And so we don't know right from wrong very clearly anymore. All those influences are at work. So my question was, well, how do you remove those influences? And she said, you have to learn to meditate. And she explained a bit more. And so I started my lessons with one of the young sisters who was there, not with Dadi, but one of the younger ones, right that same evening. And when I walked back home from the center, I'd been told about the soul, and the soul, this shining star that sends light. And as I walked home, which is about 15-20 minute pleasant walk, I got home and I couldn't remember how I'd come from there to here. It was like I'd been flying. The soul was so intoxicated with this idea that I am this shining star, and it felt very real. And so that was the start of my journey.
Okay, so this experience, and interestingly, I think Dadi Jayanti has been a very integral part of your life, because right there, then again, you got disconnected, but again you came back and you caught up.
Right.
Yeah. And the inner calling, the trigger, like.
Yes, the connection with Dadi has been a very strong one, because then when a centre started in London, my parents started a centre in London, the first one outside India.
Okay.
This was in October 71. And then in 74, Dadi was asked by the organisation to come to London. And so I travelled with her to London in 1974, April. And she spent about 40 years there, coming to India frequently and travelling the world.
40 years, okay.
So I shared a room with her for 40 years, which was amazing. And so between the time that she arrived in 1974 and the time she came back to settle in India, she came back again several times, but settle was then India. That was 2005, so that was 41 years to be precise. And in that space of time, she trained teachers from all over the world, and it is her efforts, of course, God's grace and God's plan, but she became the instrument to establish centres in 120 countries. And she was also the one who inspired our affiliation with the UN as an NGO. And then as today we hold general consultative status with the UN. And I think Brahmakumaris was the first purely spiritual organization to be given this status. And this was because they could see that the subject of values impacted every single aspect of life. And they're dealing with all the difficulties, the challenges that human beings face. Peace is a starter, but also children, the environment, health, all the different issues. And they could see the impact of values or lack of values on all of this. So they felt that a spiritual voice was necessary to be able to impact this.
Okay, great. So, yeah, Dadi Janki, whatever little I have known about her, is she had a great leadership role in taking the organization to a new high in terms of the global presence. And one thing which comes to my mind, and I feel like asking you, is you were doing all this, you were talking to Dadi Janki, you came back to India, then you had your first sort of consciousness realization that you are a star. So those things were going on, but you were still staying at home. When did, like, we have known that famous story of Mother Teresa, that when she was traveling to look for poverty and serve, then there was an inner calling which said, go back to Calcutta. And that's how Nirmal Hriday comes into existence. So same way, when did you realize that you needed to sort of leave your home and join the order full-fledged?
When I started studying properly, that was April 1968,
Okay.
and Brahma Baba was still alive. And so I'm very glad, and I'd had the fortune of meeting him through my teenage years also. And there was a moment when, in June, I went to meet with him, and I said to him that this is what I want to do for my life. And we have open eyes meditation. And so he gave me what we call drishti, looking at the other one, but not seeing anything else except this shining star, and being in God's remembrance. So he was sharing drishti with me. And in that moment, again, it was a very, very powerful experience of going beyond the physical dimension to a dimension of light, and the experience of a meeting with the source, the divine being. And that really cemented my feeling that this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And so I told Baba, and he said that he knew it already. And
it was coming, he knew it.
And he then, when he said this, I remembered that 3 years earlier on a visit to Abu, he'd said to me, you'll be a spiritual teacher. And he was speaking in Hindi. Ruhani Shikshak, and I didn't know what was Ruhani, I didn't know what a Shikshak, I knew very basic Hindi at that point. And so then I recalled that this is what he had told me, and so I was very pleased that I was now fulfilling his prophecy.
So when this, so that moment you decided that yes, this is from where you change course, if I may put it.
Yes.
And your parents were comfortable with it?
My mother was very uncomfortable because she thought that I wouldn't be able to manage life in India, because at that time India was still pretty basic. This is 1968. And she said, how will you manage? You don't like the dust, you don't like the flies, how are you going to manage?
Okay, so the physical part she was more worried.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I said that, you know, when you're in love, none of those things matter, and I felt that I just experienced God's love, and this is what I want to do. And so what happened actually then was that Brahma Baba passed away in January 1969. My father felt that give her time and she'll decide exactly what she wants. No harm in letting her try. He knew Brahma Baba anyway, so he felt very comfortable with this person. And then in 1969, January, Brahma Baba passed away. I was in India and they were in London, so my father got very concerned and he wanted me back. And Dadi Janki again was the one who said, but you should go back, let them feel comfortable with your lifestyle, and then when everything's settled, then you come back again, no harm. And so I went back and I started to share these ideas, and my father thought still that I'm on a trip and at some point I'll get bored with this and change. And that never happened.
Right.
And so then after a couple of years, then I came back to India. Meanwhile, there'd been a delegation from India that had come in '71, and they stayed, 5 of them, in our own home. And so he was exposed to it in a deeper way than just my mother and myself. One particular individual was the instrument who shared with him the teachings in a very beautiful way. And so he began to understand a little bit more. And then I came back to India thinking I've done my job, the London Centre is established, I can now be in India. And that was September 73. Then April 74, the sisters who were in London at the centre wrote to the heads of the organisation to say that it's time for a senior to come to London and see where we go, because we're not seeing a clear direction for things. So Dadi Janki was asked to go, and I was asked to go back with her to translate for her. Okay. So I came back, though I had no intention of coming back to London, but I came back with her. One other thing that, from all these things that you've heard so far, but maybe it hasn't been mentioned, Brahma Baba very much believed in women's empowerment. When he had his visions that transformed his life, he knew that there had to be a better world, and there had to be a lot of work put in to change attitudes and awareness to make that better world happen. And when he reflected on that whole subject of how could this better world of Satyug, the golden age, come about, what struck him was equality. And the inequality with women, of course, was rampant, especially in that subcontinent area, which was Sindh, which is where he was living. Women were really second-class citizens, no choice of their lifestyle whatsoever. You did as you were told by father or brother or husband, somebody. And he decided that he would give women, the women who were coming, it was men and women, but the majority were women, he would give training to the women for self-empowerment and have women as the administrators and leaders. And so from that time on, the Brahmakumaris have, there's respect for brothers also, and they're part of our organization, but the leadership role is always in the hands of women.
Yes, which is very unique, and maybe it's, to my knowledge, it's the only organization spanning over so many countries is headed by a woman, and so the seeds are sown there.
Correct.
So you actually got into this journey, let's put it 1968, and then you have been in London, and then it has been something like one particular area of focus, and then you settle it, you stabilize it, and then move on. It's been almost like that, as you have mentioned. And Dadi Janki has been your guiding light, and of course I think she passed away as recent as 22, if I'm right. 20, she passed away. I was very, as I was telling this morning, I had a glimpse of her in Mount Abu. Mm-hmm. Of course, she was in her wheelchair, and the person who has come, she was actually with that wheelchair. So I had a glimpse of her. Mm-hmm. And even then, that time she was 103, I remember.
That's right.
And she was full of life.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Now, okay, so let's shift little gears and now come to the body of work that you have had so far. And straight I come to the focus of today's discussion in the morning session was about climate change. And what I could find is you have focused a lot, concentrated a lot in this space. Maybe there could be others, but I was also seeing the 6-pager that Shweta Behan had sent to me. And there also climate change has been an area of focus. So how did you feel that, how this interest in this particular space, did you got it actually?
In the 80s, there was the Earth Charter, and because I'm a representative, the NGO rep for the UN in Geneva, the program for Earth Charter and the preparation for that was happening in Geneva. So I was attending those events, and that's very much focused around human values and what it is human beings need to do to make a difference, to make the world sustainable. So that was my first connection. And then when, through the 90s, I was just asking myself the question, what difference can human activity make to the environment at this point? Already there was a lot of degradation, and we were aware of that. And I hadn't heard about climate change till around 1993. And I was at an interfaith event, in fact, the World Parliament of Religions. And that was in 93, after 100 years. You know,
Vivekanand's Chicago.
That's right.
Okay.
So he'd been in Chicago in 1893, and then with 2 world wars and everything, nobody thought about interfaith. Then in 1993, they decided to honor the anniversary of that, the centenary, and there was the World Parliament of Religions in Chicago. So another part of my life has been very much involved in interfaith. That's another section. I mean, Brahmakumaris offers so many opportunities, and there's such a need in every single area, women, youth, children, environment, all of these. So we've been participating in all of this. But in that particular event in Chicago, I first heard about climate change, and it intrigued me that human beings could have such an impact on something that's in a way so distant. You know, what's happening with the ocean currents, what's happening with the sun, and what am I doing? So it seems such a distant thing. But I began to look into that and became interested, curiosity. But then in 2009, because it was happening within the region in which I live, in Copenhagen, I was asked to be there for that. And so we were given observer status at that point, which means that we attend the government proceedings, but of course we don't have a voice in it in the sense of a vote or anything, but we're there.
But you oversee the thing, sort of
we're there, observers.
Onlooker, yeah.
Yeah. And of course then you interact with the government delegates also. So it's a good place to be. And people there we were finding were, like I mentioned, their first question was, what has consciousness got to do with climate? But with a few simple steps, you begin to understand it. And the interesting thing for me has been to meet the climate change scientists at these events, and then further at their own place of studies, and in particular in Germany, in Potsdam, they have 2 institutes that look at these subjects of climate change in a big way. And the scientists there have been fascinating because they're very interested in seeing how all the predictions they've made about climate change have accelerated in a much faster way than they'd anticipated. For example, 10 years ago, you know, you thought that the melting of the ice was happening in some places, but nobody predicted that in Antarctica, that the mountains there would turn brown. And that's what's happening today. So the speed with which that's happened has been amazing. And so the more I look at the subject and hear about the subject and understand it, I really see that it is the biggest challenge of our times. It's actually the challenge that led to rioting in Chile, the lack of water. It's probably also a trigger for what's happening in Syria, because again, it was climate change impact there. But also, at the UN, 20 years ago, they said that the next war, world war, is going to be because of lack of water.
Water, yes.
And today, yes, we're seeing the impact, but also we're just hearing the stories, and of course you see all the films and everything, about the loss of civilizations with the small islands in the Pacific, and like the Marshall Islands.
Yes.
A woman was the president. I don't know whether it's still a woman president, but when it was a woman president, she was at one of these COPs, and she and her daughter both were there. And she was saying that how come people don't care? They want to look after themselves. The rich countries say they want to help, but we don't see the help coming. And a civilization is just going to go underwater. People are saying, why don't you move? Well, yes, I can move to save my skin, but who's going to save my civilization? And I know that once I move away from my island, I won't have contact with the land. I won't have contact with my history. What about my children and grandchildren? What's going to happen to them? And so it's a very big tragedy that's unfolding in front of our eyes. And most people are unaware.
You're not realizing it, that the crisis is already on. We are in the midst of the crisis, actually.
Absolutely. Mm.
And there was something very interesting recently I came across. When we talk of crisis, we always think an event to be a crisis, but actually the crisis has set in, maybe in this case, few decades back, and today we are in the midst of it. So now talking about climate change, let me move to another important part. Women's Day is around the corner, and almost it's a sort of a ritual that every year we sort of observe with a lot of fanfare. Since you have the world view of things, what do you think? Have women progressed?
Only marginally.
Why do you say that?
Because if you still look at the statistics of how many leaders there are, even in the UN, where are they? The last time Antonio Guterres was elected, there were women in the race, but they somehow got sidelined, and it was again a man. At that time, I really thought that a woman can make it. And there were a few women in the running, and I think they could have done an excellent job, but they were sidelined. So if the body that's promoting women's equality doesn't have equality within its own ranks, not even just the role of Secretary General, but all the way across, that's one example. The other is the corporate area. And yes, women have been given greater opportunity. But if you look at the numbers of those who occupy the boardrooms, it's like 10% still, something like that. India actually does well. We have great women leaders, women ministers, and also Indian women in leading international organizations. They hold a very good role, but that's a handful. It's not reached the level of day-to-day living in which women should be given the dignity that they actually afford. Looking at the subject of domestic violence, again, no change. If anything, COVID made matters much, much worse, and women's employment has suffered a lot through COVID also. So there hasn't been, in an external way, very much change. And what we're talking about is inner change, empowerment. So that although, yes, I have a female body and I love the role of being in a woman's body, no problem with that, but yet I have to come to the consciousness of the inner being, which actually has masculine and feminine qualities. So it's not only women who have compassion, men also have compassion.
Otherwise the world would have been a much difficult place to live.
Exactly. If you look at somebody like Gandhi, he had not only the power of leadership and so on and the courage, but he also had the compassion and the heart to have that vision of equality. Or I look at Brahma Baba, and again he had amazing qualities of leadership, but very much also the qualities of a mother. You know, on my first visit to Mount Abu, I'd met him when I was 8, then I was 14 when I came to Mount Abu for the first time. And the mother of the organization had passed away just a year earlier, so this was 1966. So I must have been 17 actually. So at that time, we went to see Baba at night to say goodnight, and he's saying to me and my little brother, did you bring your towel? Did you bring your toothpaste? Otherwise we can have it. Here's Lachush, you can look after
the concern, which is there.
Now here's a leader of a spiritual organization.
And such minute details he's getting into.
So he's a mother.
As a mother would be.
As a mother. So very much motherly qualities also. So men and women have similar qualities, but the culture and society nurtures different things in men and women. But can I move away from the consciousness and limits of this identity, not just gender, but also age, but also color, race, and come to the awareness of the soul. And in that way, then I can develop all my potential. Then I won't be put down by somebody who says, well, you're a woman and you can't do this. No. Yes, I'm a woman, but I can do this. And so the empowerment of women is absolutely a spiritual question. You have to come to that awareness of who you truly are and not just your skin. And the same for the whole subject of dignity. When I tap into my own inner resources and I discover the peace, the truth and love that I carry within myself, I hold my head up high. I have self-esteem. I have value for myself, and that's not ego.
It's self-respect.
That's right. And then nobody can take away my dignity, whether it's the color of my skin or my gender or my age. None of that makes a difference.
So, which means that to a large extent, women empowerment, the responsibility actually lies with women themselves. Rather than seeking concessions and asking for it, I think first they need to practice. It's also a matter of habit.
Yes,
and not
that's right.
being loud and the so-called feminist part of it, but actually realizing and harnessing your own potential which is within. Exactly. Which again Swami Vivekananda would say for every individual, the power
true.
lies within.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
That's pretty interesting.
And also this idea that men are superior, that goes away when a man has a spiritual understanding. Then he also realizes that I don't have superiority over another human being, but I have my own inner dignity depending on my own innate qualities and virtues.
And then the behavior pattern changes.
Exactly.
Yeah. This is something the other day also I was reading when we were talking of atrocities on women, that the very starting point could be that every individual, irrespective of whether a man or a woman, starts practicing self-respect.
Yeah.
And that sort of changes the behavior pattern.
You see, whatever happens inside of me is how I then behave with others. So when I respect my own self, I'm going to respect you.
Absolutely.
I'm going to respect all forms of life. I'm going to respect the laws of the government. I'm going to respect the laws of spirituality. So, and because we don't have that, all the other things have fallen down.
So moving on, I just wanted to touch a few things. So we have touched about climate change, we have touched about women's empowerment. You have been coming, as you said, you have been coming to India very often, maybe twice a year, and you've been watching India from within and from outside. You have had that opportunity. So do you in general feel that India is progressing? What's your view?
Definitely in terms of technology and in terms of providing comforts to many, many more people than had it before. But yet I still see poverty is huge, it's rampant, and I think it needs a bigger heart worldwide. You know, if you look at the SDG goals, the
sustainability goals, right?
Yeah. Poverty is one of them, women's empowerment is another, but all of these 17 different goals that they have, all of those, I think, the only way to be able to resolve them is through spirituality and the right consciousness. In the year 2000, there was the Millennium Peace Summit, and it was the first time in August that the UN had invited spiritual religious leaders. And so 1,000 of them had gathered there. And Dadi and Amma were the only two women spiritual leaders.
Dadi Jayanti and?
Amma. She's a leader from South India.
Amritananda, yeah.
So they were the only two women spiritual leaders from around the world, and both were from India, so that has a nice tale to it. So the first day was just prayers and meditation, which was beautiful. Second day was the working session, and all the leaders of the UN were there. Environment, children at risk, generally children, population, WHO, UNICEF, they were all there. And every single one of them said that we have more resources in terms of funding, more technology, more information, more human resources, but yet we failed to be able to do the work we set out to do. Things are worse today than they were before. Only one person stated that yes, WHO has made progress, we've eliminated, at that time he said TB and smallpox, but in fact TB has come back since, the DDT story. So the question that they were asking is, how come we're throwing all of these extra resources to all these problems and things haven't changed for the better? And they said, this is why we've called the spiritual and religious leaders. Why? Because we feel that it has to be human will that is missing. We've got everything else, but we don't have the will to be able to change it. And so that was telling in itself that they needed to have spiritual people, religious people, because we serve both at the ground level, the grassroots, but also reach across to the top. But it's people across the world that need to change their heart. So I think that worldwide, this is the issue, that when we have spiritual awareness, then we recognize all human beings as equal, and we need to be able to change this imbalance that's happening and bring about equity. And so I think that Bharat has a lot of spirituality, but applying that spirituality in terms of everywhere and reaching the top, I think that's the missing factor.
Okay, so the transformation, when we talk of transformation, it has to be here.
Exactly.
It has to be here. Not the physical part, but much more deep-rooted.
That's right. In fact, they use the word transformation in terms of the SDGs, but they haven't defined what is transformation. And so we had a series of workshops at the UN, and that was organized by the Population Fund. And within the roundtable gatherings, this is what we were discussing. The transformation has to happen at the inner level.
Inner level.
And when that happens, everything else will,
So pleasure talking to you, Sister Jayanti. And I don't know, I think we have already spoken for almost half an hour, and when it has passed by, it was interesting insight from your life, and of course, the larger issues and the connect. Thank you so much for coming here and spending your time. I know you have a very hectic schedule ahead, so wish you all the best, and may you always be connected with us and continue to guide us from time to time. Whenever next time you are in Rourkela, please spend some time with us. It's always interesting and very invigorating. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for all the support that you've always given us, and I know that our sisters come here regularly.
Great.
So thank you for opening the doors for that.
Thank you so much.
Om Shanti.